Using a CPS or customer programming software app to program your DMR radio is almost a given. In this video, we'll go through the process of constructing a code plug for the Ailunce H1. If you're used to other DMR CPSs, this will be familiar to you, though there are a couple of differences from apps used for some other DMR radio brands. If you haven't seen my review of the H1 yet, I'll have a link in the description and on the end card to this video. The Retevis/Ailunce folks provided the radio for that review. I need to emphasize one point. Download the 1.0.6 or higher version of the CPS from the Retevis website. This CPS looks just like the 1.0.0 version you may have downloaded for the HA1UV dual band HT from Ailunce. The earlier version doesn't recognize the H1, but the newer version will recognize the H1 and the HA1UV. Let's jump into the CPS. So here's the Retevis CPS for the H1. You can see I've had it connected here before, but let's just go through it as you would as if you had just downloaded and installed this on your computer. As with all CPSs, I know what my COM port is. I looked at my device manager to figure that out, and you'll need to do that for your computer. It'll be different than mine most likely. So we're going to start by going to connect the device, and we need to select the port, and mine is COM port 4. And then we're going to select the model, and it is the H1. And then we're going to click OK, and it's going to read from the radio. Now, since I've programmed this radio already, I've already downloaded the user database. We'll be downloading the programming that I've already done that we'll be looking at with a little more specificity here in just a moment. So I'll be quiet, edit out some of this time, and we'll be back when it's loaded. Here we are at 100%. It changes and it says it read successfully. The radio is rebooting, and it gives me the basic model information for this H1 radio, and the specific things are listed here. Now, if you've programmed DMR code plugs before, most of this is going to sound pretty familiar to you, but there are a couple of little different things. This Retevis Ailunce CPS is a little bit different than some of the other CPSs for DMR radios that I've worked with. First, at the top, we've got the model information, zone, channel information, common stuff, scan. So I've got some zones specified, some channels specified. I've got common settings, buttons, power, and so forth. But unfortunately, some of the things that you have to set up in the DMR services are required here. And so we're going to skip down through channel, common, scan, and we're going to go right into DMR services so that we can add into the code plug those things that we're going to need to establish our channels. If you've used DMR before, you know that a channel contains elements from the database here in the radio. If this is sounding Greek to you, I've got a DMR programming overview video that I'll leave at the end card to this video and in the description below. That'll help you better understand how DMR works. Of the digital systems, DMR can be one of the more complicated ones, but once you figure it out, it's really pretty easy. So we're going to start here in DMR services. We can go with encryption. This is the encryption keys. For amateur radio, that's not allowed, but the radio could be used as a DMR radio for commercial, and depending on the license, encryption could be allowed. Quick text is right here, and there are some things that you could add in to just send a quick radio-to-radio digital text message. You can add some in or use these default ones. I'm not planning to use those, so I'm going to leave those alone. Priority contacts is where I'm going to put my talk groups. And so you can see I have 14 talk groups loaded in, and I'm going to need those in my channel information. Unlike some other CPSs where you can download and then import all of the talk groups from the places where you can get them, like Brandmeister, for example. I haven't found a way to be able to do that. There is import and export up here, as you can see, but the format for this is different than what comes out of that. And so since I normally don't have 1,000 talk groups that I think I'm going to want to get into, and then I can easily manually on the radio enter a new one if that becomes necessary, I went through the list and got the ones that I usually hang out on, the ones that I'm interested in, and then I added those here in the priority context. And so by adding, I can just go in and add, and it comes in here, and there's just those three things that you need to add. You give it a name, whether it's a group or private call, and the talk group ID, and that's all there is. And so I've added those 14. I'm going to delete this one out right here. Now, in local address contacts, this is where you're going to import the users, and you can get that import information from the Ailunce.com Resource Center, and I've got a picture here. First is the Resource Center splash page, and then at the bottom, we've got the ability to pick a radio and then make a couple of choices in terms of what you're going to download, and then download the users. And that's the same 500,000 users as opposed to going to radioidnet.net. Again, it's because the format is different. So if you like playing with comma separated values in Excel, you could probably, export an empty one here and then reconfigure that, but it's just as easy to download. And when you export, this fills up with all of those, and then write it right away. But know that I have entered that information into the radio. Next, I want to go down to my group, receive groups, and I've set up receive groups that kind of match the things that I'm going to use in terms of zones. And so I've got a couple of worldwides. I've got my USA Bridge 3100 with the tax in one, regionals for the Southwest United States. I've got a couple of topic related ones, and then I've got Parrot. Now, receive groups will be the things that the radio listens for when you've got that specified here again up in the channel. If you don't put in a receive group, it just listens to the channel you have selected. The degree to which you use receive groups and assign them to channels is based primarily upon how much other stuff you want to listen to when you've got that channel selected. But again, these are easy to do. And so, for example, if I wanted to add one, I could add. I'd give it a name, and then I go into edit over here. And then it gives me all of the priority contacts that I have. And I could add each of these into the receive group as I wanted to. Now, in this case, I don't want to do that. I'm going to delete that. So these are the channels I put into this particular receive group. You notice I had disconnect in there. It wouldn't be necessary. I'm not talking on disconnect. But anyway, we go down to talk alias. You can turn it on or off. Talk alias provides a little bit of digital information that will show up on the screen of the receiving radio. You can learn more about that as we go. Radio ID list is an important one. We're going to need that in the channels as well. And so to add an ID, you would just click add, and then you just type in the ID. And this is your DMR ID. So if you share your radio with a family member, you'd want to add the different radio IDs here so that they can change and have their information show up if they're using the radio. I don't have any other hams in my family, so it's just my DMR number. One touch call is a feature on this radio, and you can set that up with these various touches. If you're especially going to be using private calls or one-to-one simplex calls, you can do that and make it easy to do. How to do that is described in the user manual. Now, in terms of analog service, it's just DTMF services. I'm not going to talk about that. We've got some APRS things, and so you can go through that. If you're familiar with APRS, this is going to make sense to you. So I'm using GPS to know where I am. For analog GPS, I've got my call sign, I've got my SSID. This is the little symbol. It's the little walking man. That's the letter symbol that the radio uses for that icon. I've got a wide 1.1 and wide 1.2 selected for my digipath and so forth. And then digital APRS I really don't use, and so I'm not going to talk about that. And so maybe another video for APRS. That's the APRS information. Not necessary to set up channels, but it's down here. Same thing with emergency. You can set up your emergency systems. You can set up, man down. You can set up lone worker response and all that kind of stuff. I've got the emergency system on this radio turned off. I don't plan to use it. So with these things added in, with my user separated values file uploaded to the radio, my talk groups uploaded to the radio, my radio ID uploaded to the radio or added in here during this. Now I'm ready to go up and talk about channel information, which is the next thing that'll be important for me to do. If you're finding this video helpful, please click the thumbs up button below the video and subscribe to the Gadget Talk channel. You can click the join button to learn more about becoming a channel member or make a one-time contribution by clicking the thanks button. Now, back to the CPS. So when I go into channel information, you can see this is the channel information. And if let's just pick one here. This will be a DMR channel. And so it's DMR channel 3. And so let's edit that and look at the information. I've got it labeled as hotspot HS USA because I've got this one set up to talk to my hotspot, which is the frequency you see there. It's a digital channel, and so down here it's going to be digital. If I would have selected analog, there would have been analog information down here. That's similar to other DMR radio CPSs. Because it's the hotspot, I've got the power on low, I've got a hotspot scan list, and then these basic pieces of information, transmitter timeout, and so forth. And then down here, the contact type is from that priority list. So I've got that set as priority as opposed to the local list if I wanted to set up a private channel or a private call. The contact name is USA Bridge, and you can see I've got all of these that come in. That's why those have to be loaded first, because we're putting them in now. If we didn't have the talk groups loaded, then I couldn't put them in here. Now my hotspot uses color code 1 time slot 2. It's not a repeater type hotspot, so I've got it set to simplex. I've got my radio channel ID here, and it's the only thing that shows up is my call sign, so I've got that. I've assigned the receive group list to that. I don't have encryption on. And so this is how I'm going to set up my channel. And so you want to make sure that you do all of these kinds of things. I know when I was looking at Parrot, for example, I forgot to stick this in and it was said none. And I couldn't figure out why Parrot worked. Well, that's the downside to these DMR radios, is even if you understand what you're doing, if you have just a slight oversight, it's not going to work. So be careful that you fill in the whole thing. Now, my recommendation would be to add a couple of channels in before you go through this whole process. I've got VHF and UHF channels in here too. While we're talking about that, just we'll look here. We've got the frequencies for the input and output to the repeater. The channel number is up there. All of the same information, except now it says analog section. We've got the analog here. It's the airport, and as I'm looking at this, I can see that I didn't get this CTCSS logged in. So if I call this up on my radio, I'm not going to get anything. So that's the kind of missing information that can mess things up for you. So before I save this, I'll go back, but I won't bother to do that right now. So with that, say you have a couple of hotspot channels, a couple of repeater DMR channels, a couple of VHF or UHF channels. At this point, we can go back up to the top and we can do things like add zones. And so I have a hotspot zone, and so I can go in there, and these are the channels that I have in my hotspot zone. It's all a matter of check boxes. I've got a VHF for my local area and a UHF for my local area, but you can put in zones that make sense to you. But you have to have something to put in them before you can establish them, and so that's why we did all this stuff at the lower part of this list first. Same thing here for scan lists. You have to have the information to put in your scan list. And so I have my hotspot scan list. I basically just duplicated my zones here in my scan lists. Now in the common area, these are the things that are in the menu for the radio, and there are a couple of things that carry forward, but a lot of it is just the initial setting here, as you would with any other CPS. So my radio alias, if I were going to use the talker, is my call sign and my first name. I could probably have enough characters here to add my city if I wanted to do that. My digital radio ID is number 1. That's the radio ID that I have loaded that has my DMR number. I've got squelch, and all of these kinds of things are all just the usual things you're used to seeing here. The VOX, battery saving, tones. Look at here, I've got my Roger beep on. I don't want that on, so I'll make a change there. Talk permit tone, I'm not going to worry about that because I don't have that set in terms of channel guards, but I do want the beep and so forth. My radio mode, I've got frequency and alias on channel A, and it's in band A. I've got a bunch of other things here, squelch tail eliminations. I don't have the weather alert on, but I do have the NOAA weather channels listed as the NOAA channel 1 there is the primary one that's going to come up, and digital monitor and so forth. And so those are the things that are in my settings. In buttons, I have a bunch of things here, and so I have a lot of choices with my side keys. So short press on side key 1, I've got a whole bunch of stuff. I've got it set to move my zone up 1, but I've got a lot of other things. Short on number 2, I'm going to move it down. The up and down buttons, channel up and channel down, I can change those again with a number of things. A long press, I've got it set to adjust power level, but I've got a bunch of things that I can change it to should I want to. So that'll take a little thought on your part as you think about what you want those side key buttons to be, match some of your other radios or whatever. Here are the lock settings. I don't have it on an automatic lock, but you can manually lock the button using the lock key. The power options, I have a user-defined picture. That's one of the things that I can add, and so I did that. It's got a little picture with my call sign when the radio powers up. We got the standby colors, channel name, and all this. So we've got a lot of color choices that we can do here on the radio on both the upper and lower area of the display. Here in the FM area, I've added some radio channels that are here in the Phoenix area. Simply a matter of clicking add and then putting in the channel, the frequency for that FM station, whether you want it in the FM radio scan list. And then here's where you can upload an image file. It's got to be 160 by 128, and then save it and then write it to the radio, and then write it right away so the radio will get that. And so those are the things in the common areas. And so as you can see, the big thing about setting up your DMR radio is going to be these DMR services. So you need the user list, you need your priority contacts, you need your receive groups to fill in a channel, talk alias, you can turn it on or off. It's not a requirement. If the other radio has the user list in their database, it'll match your ID number with your name in the database, but you do have to put your radio ID in there. And then if you want to play around with private calls to your friends, you can use the one-touch commands that we looked at. So that's a quick look here at the Retevis CPS. It's really pretty easy, although it is a bit different than some of the other CPSs. Now up here we've got the usual suspects. We can go to disconnect, open save in the drop down. We can read, write, select communications port. We have the ability to make firmware updates with this. This is a brand new radio. I haven't seen any updated firmware. Change my language and then help about. And so at this point, what I would do is I would go up here to the operations and I would write to my radio, and the changes that I made would show up then here in my radio, and that would be ready then to reboot the radio and then have those DMR channels in. So now that we've completed all this, we can go back and add as many channels as we think we need, and then we'll go up here to our operations and write that information back to the radio. With that information written to the radio, I can go back here to File, and then Save As, and then save this code plug to my computer. That'll allow me to reestablish the code plug should I mess something else. Now, since I found a couple errors, I'm going to go back and fix those errors, but that's what our CPS looks like for the H1. Thanks for watching this video, especially all the way to the end. Join me over here for my review of the Ailunce H1 DMR radio. I've also linked to my earlier video on DMR Programming Basics. Good luck with your new code plug and 73.